welcome to Note My Objection.
Thank you, Catherine. So
Yeah.
great to see you
I
again.
know. I'm excited for you to be here. And so, caveat for everybody
Yeah.
who's listening now. I had the pleasure of working underneath you many years ago.
Oh
It
my
feels
gosh.
it feels a little scary to think that was. I think it was in 2010 is when I started in the DA's office
Yeah.
in the drug unit before I was in law school,
Yes.
anything, and you were the chief of that unit.
I
So
was.
it's pretty cool to see you sort of all these years later and
It's so
running.
cool to see you. I mean, going from, narcotics to grand jury to law school to being a mom and
little
so
bit of everything.
accomplished and
Thank you.
and still so beautiful inside out.
I
So
appreciate that. I
it's so
appreciate
true,
that.
yeah.
And so we have you here today because you are running for Norfolk County District
I
Attorney.
am.
And so for many people in the Massachusetts area know that Norfolk County has had quite a bit of attention on it over the past few years. It was Michael Morrissey's seat who's no longer running. And there's a number of you who are vying for the seat. What made you at this point in your career decide to jump in a race with sort of so much attention on it as this one?
I decided to run on February 2nd. So it's very recent. I've been watching the other candidates as they arose and threw their hat in the ring. And I study them and try to understand what their backgrounds are and what they would bring to the office. And after doing so, I realized, and I think this is a women thing, I realized, and I was like, I'm really qualified to run the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. As you know, I have a lot of leadership experience, both in the narcotics unit and now as the director of the Office of Medicaid Board of Hearings. And I know how to manage. I have executive skills. I have over 20 years of prosecutorial skills. So I think the combination of this will restore the office to where it should be so that the residents of Norfolk County are proud of their DA's office, and the employees who work there are not under a microscope and subject to such scrutiny. So I thought about it, talked to my family about it. They were all really supportive, and I decided to run and throw my hat into the ring.
Well, and I love it too because I think that we live in such a politically divisive world. And I've heard, there's 7 of you in total, I believe, who are running, and you're all on the campaign trail. And what I've largely heard is that it's going, pretty well, that the candidates all get along with each other. And it's a little reminiscent for me of what we want the political realm to be, that we want people to be able to, have differences of opinions, to put those forward to the voters and still be able to get along,
Of course,
sort of behind the scenes. And I think we talked a little bit before we were on camera about how, as you age as a female and as somebody who is, as educated and successful as you have been, that you reach a point in your life when you say, hey, you know what? Maybe I could take on that role. And when you have that sort of not only support from people around you, but the support from really within. And I think it's commendable to throw your hat in the ring because it's a lot. Now, to go back to, obviously you're a practicing attorney and you have been for many years, and you grew up in the city of Boston, correct?
I did. I grew up in Boston, in Chinatown, in the Tai Tung Village Apartments, which is government housing, right on Harrison Avenue, across what used to be the New England Medical Center. So I grew up there. I was born in New York, and several people have already heard this. I was born right across the street from Macy's department store.
I love it.
And I am the first person in my family to be born in the United States, and my dad thought that was just a great name to name his daughter.
I love it.
And so Macy stuck, and it's a good thing I'm not born across the street from Barney's. I cannot tell you the teasing I received when I was in grade school.
Did you?
Oh my gosh. People call me Filene's. They call me Jordan Marsh. They call me, I'm really dating myself because both those department stores are unfortunately long gone. So he decided to name me that, and that was in New York. And then my family, both my parents came from Hong Kong, and my grandfather was already in New York. So my family came to the United States 6 generations ago. And so it started with my great-great-grandfather who helped build the railroads, and my great-grandfather stayed and eventually made his way to Boston. And he ended up living in Brockton and doing laundry for families on Beacon Hill. And then my grandfather came, but it wasn't until they lifted the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1964 that my grandfather, who was in New York, was able to sponsor my grandmother and my mom and my dad and my older brother to the United States. So that's how I ended up being here. And then we moved to Boston. We started out on Dwight Street in South End. And then when there was an apartment that opened up at the Tai Tung Village, my parents moved there. And I grew up there, went to high school in Boston, went to Boston University and then Suffolk Law School.
And I read there was an article that came out I think it was in the fall, maybe in September, October of last year on the Boston Globe, in which your mom was featured, talking about for people who don't know, in Boston, Judge Arthur Garrity in the 1970s basically ruled that the Boston public schools were segregated and ordered desegregation, which we commonly known as is busing, right? Yes. And that not only that affected you, but that your mom became sort of an advocate for that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course. So as you mentioned, it happened in the 70s, and I was first bused in the 3rd grade. And I was bused, for all, we went to Charlestown, but when the order came down, one of the things that people forgot was the Asian community. And no one was able to guarantee the safety of Asian children, particularly Chinese.
During the transportation.
During the 70s, it was the immigrants that were in Boston were primarily Chinese. Vietnamese was the next wave.
Okay.
So it was primarily Chinese students coming from Chinatown, many of which have immigrant parents and did not speak English. The parents didn't speak English. And my mom, who I call the warrior mother, she negotiated with DOJ, Department of Justice, and said, I'm not sending my children to school without having a guarantee that they will be there safely, that there will be a teacher who's bilingual, who also speaks Chinese, so that the teacher can communicate with both the students and the parents.
Sure.
I also have my older brother has cerebral palsy, so that added a lot of challenges in terms of going into these neighborhoods that clearly did not want us. And my mother championed for my brother, for me, and for all the other kids that lived in Chinatown, along with other parents. So she was honored in the fall. It was the 50th anniversary of the busing crisis, and she, along with other moms, and they're featured at the gate. So there's a picture of her right in Chinatown, right by the gate, which I saw just this Friday. And it's really cool to see her there. Yeah,
pretty amazing.
She's amazing. She is really my role model in terms of strength. She's the person I would go to battle with, because I want to get a little teary-eyed because she had a stroke in November.
I'm sorry to hear that.
So no, thank you. She's doing well, but when you have aging parents, that's the challenge. But
sure.
But the image that I like to keep of her is what she was like in the 70s.
And I think that it clearly, from my perspective, sometimes when we are children and our parents do things that are brave, we don't necessarily recognize them. Maybe we do a little bit in the moment, but as we grow, become educated, all these things, I'm sure as you've sort of gone through life, looking back at what your mom did. I mean, the idea that in the 1970s, a mom of a minority group and worried about her children is negotiating with the DOJ. Yes. I'm not surprised you're in the seat running for DA, because I think it's important to be role models, not only for everybody, but particularly for our children and as women to give 100%. Our daughters. I know you have both one daughter and one son to really be a role model for them as well.
Definitely. And one of the reasons I decided to run, the first persons that I went to were my children. And I wanted to make sure I get their permission, that, hey, are you okay with mom doing this? And they're both just wonderful human beings and really supportive. But my daughter's, definitely in the forefront of my head of, why not kick down some doors so that, your daughter, my daughter can, walk through and have that confidence to challenge the status quo.
That's right.
Right? And make good changes and continue to lead and manage in the way that we already do for our families every day.
That's
every
right.
day.
And
right?
we can't expect, other people to just do it for us. Sometimes we have to do it ourselves, And so how was the experience for you? So in 3rd grade, you started being bused. Do you recall any significant feelings about like that? That must have been a really, because again, some people, know about busing, some don't, but it was a very tumultuous time in the city, depending on what neighborhood you lived in. I mean, even the neighborhood I grew up in, South Boston, there was a lot of racism. There was, pushback against it. And a lot of that went towards the kids who didn't have a choice, really.
Yes.
So can you explain a little bit, what that experience was like for you?
Of course, it was horrible. It was horrible on one hand, but a wonderful experience on the other. And I'll talk about the horrible so I can end with the positive. It was horrible because we were bused to neighborhoods. So I was sent to Harvard Kent
Okay.
school, which is for 4th and 5th grade. And it was it's in Charlestown, and it was not a welcoming neighborhood at the time. And what made it really bad was then there was a busing strike. Okay, so
Yep.
so I was in 4th grade, in 5th grade, right? I can't remember whether I was in the 4th or 5th grade. There was a busing strike, and we would have to take the Orange Line to Charlestown. And I can imagine like sending my kids now
Right.
in 4th or 5th grade, taking the T on their own. I mean, we had one car in the family. My dad worked in restaurants, ultimately owning his own later on. But he took the car and went to work. And my mom stayed home for a bit, and then she worked for the Boston Public Schools later on. But you put your kids on the T and you
Scary.
go. And I remember being escorted by Boston police officers to school. In fact, some of them I ended up, connecting with later on when I became an ADA
Wow.
at Suffolk County, and and people throwing things at us. It was really hateful. And I remember thinking, why are people hating on us? I mean, that wasn't really a word at the time, but
Sure.
I thought that, why are people so angry that we're here? We haven't done anything. We're just trying to go to school. But people were really racist and really hateful. And that really shaped my world
I'm sure.
growing up. But on the other hand, because of the busing, because of the desegregation, I really learned to immerse myself in different communities. So I have friends from every community, all walks of life, and I'm comfortable speaking to anyone and everyone because you learn that. Because in middle school, I went to Phyllis Wheatley Middle School, and that was in Dudley Square behind.
Yep.
It's unfortunately defunct, and those were such wonderful years. Middle school is like it's usually really
Tough.
challenging for a
Yeah.
lot of kids. I really loved middle school, and I remember going to school with kids from Dorchester, South End, JP, Roslindale, Roxbury, Mattapan. A lot of these kids went to the Trotter, and they
Yep.
went to the Phyllis Wheatley. So I became friends with all these people, and then we went on to high school together, a lot of them, and so it was wonderful. It was just it's the way we all should be, right? We should all
I
be
think you're
able
right.
to be friends with everyone, get along, and not really worry so much about being excluded because of the way we look or in ways that we can't help. But it was wonderful. It ended up being a really great experience.
Well, and I think that's important for you to point out because we do have, again, we live in it's a really interesting political time where in many ways, to me, it feels a little bit like we've gone backwards. We made a lot of sort of progress, and now we're getting back into sort of this like otherism, getting entrenched in these
Yes.
bubbles and communities. And I had a similar experience. I went to Catholic school in South Boston, and then I went to Boston Latin Academy in 7th grade. And I have to tell you, to be honest, I don't think I really knew anybody who wasn't a white kid from, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't know anybody who was Asian. I didn't know anybody who was black.
Yeah.
And for me, it was transformative
Yes,
for really the rest of my life.
Yes.
It just opened my eyes up to like, whoa,
Yes.
there's a whole world and different people. And for me, and I'm sure it's similar growing up, with a mom and dad like you had, to be open to those, other ideas and other cultures instead of being afraid of them. And I think that's what we want from a public school system.
Definitely.
Ultimately.
Instead of being so insular, and later on, my parents ended up owning the Royal Garden restaurant in Kingston.
wow.
They owned it for nearly 40 years. And again, my parents had to fully immerse themselves in American culture and customs and everything, and they did so successfully. They were able to they have friends from every walk of life, and not just from Chinatown, my dad's mahjong buddies, but everyone, I just the police departments, the fire departments in Kingston, and just regular customers whose children end up working for my dad, and then my mom and dad, and then growing up and their children working. So that's the way it should be, and that's what busing did for me. It was very traumatic in the beginning, but ultimately I wouldn't have the friends that I have today without that experience.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And because of through the Boston public school system, you got a scholarship to
I did.
Boston University.
I did, yeah. I went to BU. I graduated from the College of Communications. I was a journalism, political science major, and then I ended up going to Suffolk University Law School.
And what made you want to be a lawyer?
You know, this is going to sound a little corny, but I took a First Amendment class.
Oh, interesting.
In college, because a lot of, journalism, speech, right?
Sure.
It's all speech. So I took a First Amendment class, and I remember sitting in the class at BU Law School, and I thought this was fascinating. And this was back, I'm going to date myself. This was back in the 80s.
Yep.
So it was a hot Supreme Court. It was hot. There was a lot of speech
Cases.
Yeah, Justice Brennan was there. It was a lot of speech. And I just thought it was fascinating. And I wanted to explore that more. So I ended up going to law school. And so I never had this one straight path in my life. And when I do mentor young attorneys, I do this for my children too. I mean, just do what makes you passionate, what sparks your interest, and just be curious, but don't glue yourself to a path of like, well, I need to get from A to Z.
That's right.
It's okay to like stop at E and D and F. And I think that that's a big part of who I am, because I have a lot of diverse experience as a lawyer. I've had quite a few jobs, with every position that I've had, I've taken skills from those positions, and it's become who I am.
And going into some of your experience. So did you go right into the DA's office from law school?
I did not. So after law school, I ended up joining a firm. I did big law for a year.
Oh, you did?
I
didn't realize that.
I did. I did big law.
In and out quickly?
I was there for a year. The work was really, really interesting. It was really interesting, but it wasn't for me.
Sure.
It wasn't for me, but it did pay off, some
Sure.
loans.
Yeah.
So it served its purpose. And an opportunity came for me to join the Attorney General's office. And at the time, Scott Harshbarger was the Attorney General. So I was really lucky to get into that office. I worked in the Administrative Law Division, which is under the Government Bureau. And at a very young age, I handled some really interesting, complex cases. And before I knew it, I was arguing in the appeals court, and then I was in the SJC. I was in the federal court, district court. I was in the First Circuit, and the Americans with Disabilities Act was enacted while I was still at the Attorney General's office.
Okay.
And one of the really interesting cases that I had was to interpret the ADA and whether it applied to mom and pop stores that sold lottery tickets, because the argument was that, well, because you are selling lottery tickets for the Commonwealth, you are therefore an agent of the Commonwealth, and therefore you need to comply with ADA. And so I litigated that, and it was just a really intellectually challenging and fun case to handle in federal court. So I ended up doing that. And it was great. I really loved that job. I really loved it. But then I ended up moving to Cleveland. So I moved there.
Yep.
I was there for 7 years, and I ended up going back to big law. That got us the down payment for our first home. so every time I went into private practice, it was like for a sole financial purpose.
Well, and I think that's, there's a lot of people who don't realize that there's quite an income, salary disparity between where you go as an attorney. And there's a lot of people who go into sort of big law for that purpose, to say like, well, I'm going to make a ton of money so I can accomplish some things that I want in my life.
It's harsh. I remember leaving the law firm in 1993 and joining the AG's office. My salary went from a certain number to $25,000. Yeah. I mean, $25,000 as an AG working 12-hour days. But because I love that job. So it wasn't to me the pay, it wasn't the hours. I tell my children this, that if you find something that sparks your passion and your curiosity, you don't sit there and count hours. You don't. You do it because you love it. So I lasted a year at this firm in Cleveland, and somebody said, hey, why don't you join the prosecutor's office? And so that's Cuyahoga County. It's the largest county and the largest prosecutor's office in all of Ohio. And so I ended up joining that. I did appeals for a few years. Yep. And then they moved me into the major felony unit. And from there, I tried cases every month. I handled theft cases, narcotic cases, sexual assault, domestic violence, even homicide cases.
which is in
Yeah.
often in major felony type units. This is a really good place for lawyers to start because you really, like you just described, you run the gamut. So it gives you the experience of, not being in just a specialized unit, but really being able to deal with, victim cases, non-victim cases, up and down, run the gamut. And so from there, you then was your next jump back to Boston in Suffolk County?
No, so I did that, and then so I had my son in 1999, and then I was pregnant with my daughter in 2002, and I knew I had another year left in Cleveland, and I thought, why don't I try criminal defense work? Why don't I do that? In the years that I was in Cleveland, I ended up having really immersed myself in the legal community and had a lot of ties there. So I decided to hang up my shingle. And for a year, I did criminal defense work. And they were all indigent clients. They're all court appointed.
Yep.
And I had an amazing year. I had some really complicated cases. I think I had 3 homicide cases, took 2 to trial, pled out 1. And I wanted that experience because when you're a prosecutor, as you know, your responsibility is to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts or the state of Ohio. It's to the government entity of which you represent. But I found for myself as a defense attorney, I am accountable for an individual whose constitutional rights fully depend on me.
That's right.
Totally depend on me. And these were mostly incarcerated. They were held without bail or a very high bail. So it was constantly going to visit them in lockup. And I realized like how important that was to, when you're a prosecutor, you're just like, oh, okay, I have this case. You have victims, you have family, you have your law enforcement. But when you're a defense attorney, it's you and your client. And it's your job to get investigators if you need it, to get court, funds to do certain things you need.
Right.
You are this person's
Lifeline.
only advocate, lifeline, only advocate. And that is an incredible responsibility that I was never fully aware of until I started doing criminal defense. And I really enjoyed that too. I remember one Easter, later on, one client, he tracked me down. And it was a narcotics case. And he tracked me down back in Milton and sent me a card and said, "You've changed my life. I've been clean. Thank you so much." It was
amazing.
Yeah, amazing. And I've gotten other letters from other clients like that. And that was really a transformative experience that I think everyone should experience as a prosecutor.
But I think you're right in that. The same, having worked in the DA's office for, sometime both before being an attorney and then as an attorney and then being on, doing some stuff on the defense side. It is important because, and I think the thing about being a good attorney, especially in the criminal system, is you really need to be able to understand both sides. You need to be able to understand both sides of the legal argument, but also sort of everything else that comes with it. And I think it actually makes you a better, being a prosecutor and then going to the defense side, I think makes you a better defense attorney for sure.
For sure.
And vice versa, I do think there's maybe some, and maybe that's something if you're elected, you can kind of think about some sort of project or pilot, because there is sort of a emotional part of it that you don't quite get, I think, if you only ever in the prosecutor's office, that yes, your job is to prosecute, but it is a human being on the other side. And there's a lot of implications and complications that go with that. So, so after it wasn't long, the defense side wasn't long.
No, because I moved. No, so I probably would have kept it up.
Stayed doing that.
I would have stayed doing that if I stayed in Cleveland. But I ended up moving. So I moved back to Massachusetts in 2003 with my 3-month-old daughter. And I think Carter was 4. 4. They're 4 years apart.
Yeah.
They're gonna give me grief for this. Like, you don't remember how old I am? I do know how old you are.
Yes.
But no. They're gonna give me grief. But so we moved back, and I ended up taking 15 months off. So just to make sure that they are settled into their new homes. I mean, we left a lot of friends in Cleveland. I really enjoyed being there for 7 years. And Carter had a lot of friends. I just wanted to make sure that he settled into the Carriage House School.
Sure.
That, and it was wonderful. I loved staying at home with Avery and Carter. I mean, Avery and I, we went to Gymboree back in the day, went to swimming classes at the Quincy Y. It was wonderful. And then after 50 months, I decided, okay, I need to go back to work.
Right.
Carter's going to kindergarten, I'm going to make that transition. So I ended up going to the First Circuit, the Court of Appeals, and I was a staff attorney there for a year.
Interesting.
And so I know I've been all.
How did I, even and I'm doing my research and this is, but it's really interesting to hear all of the different kinds of, they're sort of all in the same world, obviously, but the kind of different areas that you've practiced in.
Yeah.
And how did you like it there?
I liked it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you why I really liked it. I liked it because the Moakley Courthouse does not look like the way it does now.
No.
I can't find it. If I go down,
Yeah.
go down Seaport, I'm like,
well,
where
the
is it?
Seaport.
I don't know where it is.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a testament to being able to get stuff done because what they turned
Amazing.
that asphalt, parking lot into basically a whole city with a beautiful courthouse, the Moakley Courthouse now.
And it was great because Avery went to daycare in the Moakley.
Yep.
And I would be able to park, and it was like $5 at the time. Like, now you can't do that. $5, get her into the courthouse, and then go upstairs and go to work, and then pick her up, get in the car, pick up Carter from after school. And so that's how it's like being a working mom, right? And with a partner who's, not busy, So that was like my life. And it was interesting because it was back to like the research and writing. And that was something I really enjoyed at the Attorney General's office. Was I handled a lot of appellate cases or cases that involved declaratory judgment.
Yep.
So there was a lot of research and writing, which I loved, and I was back doing that. But that was just a 1-year contract. So after that, I applied to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, and I got scooped up, and I joined the appellate unit. Yep. And I was there for 5 years. And then Dan Conley, much of which I owe my prosecutorial career here in Boston, promoted me to become the chief of narcotics.
And then I met you.
I know. Yes, I still remember. I can still see your face behind the desk. You're like, who is this woman? Why is she here? I don't even know who she is. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because something that I think, again, all of us lawyers we speak our own language, we understand, but the idea that you have had so much experience in the appellate unit, the researching, that's it's sort of its own little world within the law, and being able to understand the nuance and the complexities within the law, that it's not oftentimes you just sort of see these issues and it's presented as black or white, and that's really not how it works.
No, it's
at all.
not. No, I mean, I remember when I was in the appellate unit, when somebody was handling an appeal, there was always a criticism of like, well, why do they need to do this at trial? They should have done this at trial. I'm like, well, I've tried a lot of cases when I was in Ohio, and sometimes you don't know where your case is going to turn.
Right.
And you have to learn to pivot very quickly.
Right.
But being an appellate attorney also teaches you valuable skills as a trial attorney, because you know how to preserve the record.
That's
you
right.
know how to keep that record clean. So you
know how to make sure
and
the objections
are noted very clearly and why.
Yes, that's right.
On the record.
That's right.
So because it becomes an issue on appeal. So I've learned from both those skills how to become a really well-rounded attorney. And I love to research and write. That was one, I love to write. And that's probably from, being a, journalism major, a communications major. So, but then I went to the narcotics unit, and I was there for 10 years. Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
10 years.
And what was your, obviously I understand, but what was, what was your role as, you're in Suffolk County. So this is it's a major metropolitan city. It's Boston and Revere and Chelsea and so you're handling all of what happens is in district court, in each of the individual district courts, there's, cases, and then they all come up to Superior Court.
Yes.
So if they get to you, they're considered to be sort of a more serious level. And so what was your general, like how did you run the unit? What were the kinds of cases you had?
So when I started, I remember going in and, and this is what I've done. And I've done this with my current position, is trying to study, okay, so what are the goals and objectives here? How is it organized? How is it run? What's the oversight? What's the nature of the work? And I realized that much of the narcotics unit, when I first appeared as the chief, they were low-level investigations, a lot of possession with intents. Back in the day, it was 14 grams. Now it's 18. But, it's 14 grams and over, which is a small amount. Right? And a lot of the people that were charged were selling to support a habit.
Sure.
And I don't think users were indicted or charged, but it was just what we did. I remember doing one of my first sweeps, and it was in Chelsea, and a lot of people that we swept were users or people that were dealing to support a habit, and so I looked at that. And I'm like, I don't think that's what I want to do. I don't think this is what we should spend resources on. I think people who have addictions should have that addiction treated and managed. That's the goal. And even similarly with those who are dealing to support a habit. What I really wanted to shape the narcotics unit was to make sure that we're cutting the supply, because the supply is that's the stuff, the poison that's hitting neighborhoods.
That's right.
And that ended up being my goal. And so working with the drug control unit of the Boston Police Department, which was the largest investigatory unit in the Bureau of Investigative Services, I forget how many squads there were. I think there were 9. There were like a lot of squads. And I worked with all the sergeant detectives of, okay, so let's try to reshape what we want to do, and let's improve our work product. Let's make sure that whatever you're working on, you've got all your I's dotted, your T's crossed. And I think I have the reputation, I'm pretty sure I do, that a lot of the officers would say, don't bring anything to Macy unless it's like good. Because, so I don't know if you heard that, but yeah.
Well, yes, I do. I mean, I have to tell you that there's, when I first started working in the DA's office, and I was in the drug unit, and I was basically the secretary there doing all the administrative stuff. Administrative assistant. And then I went over to the grand jury and, did all the stuff over there, which is my, my favorite. And often I tell people, much of what I learned as a lawyer happened before I even became a lawyer in the grand jury, watching so many attorneys present cases the different types of ways. And I will say that there are 2 attorneys that always were so prepared, and just, I mean, I could count on without a doubt. And it was you, Macy Lee, and Greg Henning were the 2 who were 8:30. The first case was always called at 9 o'clock in the grand jury. There with 8:30. There with your police officers. And what I've realized throughout sort of my life experiences, people like to be led.
Yes.
And people like direction. Yes. And people like, sometimes, it takes a little bit of, maneuvering. But so I'm sure that when you came in, maybe there was a little like, who's this lady and what are all these rules?
Yes.
But ultimately, everybody got on board and look at the kinds of things you were able to accomplish and really step the drug unit up in the kinds of cases you're handling.
It made them proud too, because it's, a lot of people think, people just do it. No, because I've always find that when I have high standards for myself, not just personally, but professionally, but especially as a leader, people want high standards because they want to be proud of their work product. They want to be proud of where they work. And because it's association, right? And so if you adhere to those standards for yourself, people will follow and do it themselves. And then it will trickle down as leaders themselves would do the same. And that's what happened, I like to think, with the narcotics unit at the Suffolk DA's office. We started doing wiretaps, and a lot of them, I'm pretty sure I did 8. And some of them were just, the results were amazing. One of them, the West Roxbury drug control unit, ended up seizing 53 kilos in a shower in West Roxbury. And that's something that they probably never thought about doing before I got there. I just think that they started going for big cases and focusing on the top as opposed to the bottom. And that was just, you saw me in the grand jury. I was constantly there. My officers were always prepared. We knew how we wanted to indict. There was oversight, and we always made sure that whatever we brought to the grand jury was supported, but beyond a reasonable doubt, not just probable cause, because this is, can we try this case? Can we prove it at trial?
Right.
That was the standard that I always had for myself.
And like you said, in terms of, don't bring anything to Macy unless it's, but really, and that is the standard, because when, for instance, when you apply for a search warrant, particularly if you're up in Superior Court and it's an investigation, they're always going to go to the ADA or the chief who's handling, the case or the unit to say, okay, can you look at this before we present it to a judge or a magistrate to make sure it gets approved? And, oftentimes there are search warrants that aren't well written,
No.
that really don't have enough, and we don't. That's not what we want. We want everything to be at the sort of top level of the standard to make sure that, hey, if we're going to intrude upon somebody's personal liberty, their space, that we make sure we have everything. And so, do you feel like when you came in, you sort of able to elevate the standards within the unit?
Yes. I remember when I started, some of the search warrants I got, not all of them, some of them were, already, really knew what they were doing. But, some of the newer officers or from other, other parts of Suffolk County would come in, and I'm like, look, these are statutory requirements. If you look at the statute, it tells you what a search warrant needs to look at. It has to be numbered paragraphs, right? It has to be, there's like rules that people didn't know. I mean, like, there's actually a statute that governs search warrants. And most importantly, probable cause. And if I didn't see it, then I would send them back out and say, no, you need to do more work. You need to conduct this. You need to do that, and then bring it back to me. And so that was the result. And I like to think that because of that, the judges that would issue, because obviously my role was to look at it to make sure it's readable, that I could actually see the probable cause in there. And then we bring it to the judge. And I like to think that a lot of judges realize, like, yes, if it's coming from Macy, it's
probably pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
And not only does it sort of raise the standards of the entire unit, the investigations, but also of the individual police officers, right? Because a lot of, obviously police officers have training at the academy, but they're not lawyers, and they don't always understand the law in sort of in depth as the attorneys do. So when you work under a prosecutor or attorney in any way, that's really sort of training them to the hope is eventually that they get to the point where they're writing search warrants that, when it comes to you, like, good job, ready to go,
exactly,
instead of having to sort of develop. And so after you left the DA's office, so you were there and you were the first female chief of
first and only that I know.
Amazing. And, obviously so many widespread investigations. You left the DA's office and you went into another position, which is different and not in the criminal sense, but you were able to sort of go into this new role as director of at Medicaid of the basically the appeals hearing. So you oversee 55 attorneys. Right. I think it's someplace.
Before I went there, I actually went to the Executive Office of Health and Human Services, of which Mass Health is part of. So Mass Health is the state program for Medicaid.
Right.
And so I went in as a deputy general counsel for litigation. So I spent 2 years handling litigation against the Commonwealth or 38 judicial review, a lot of like the Mass Health cases after a member or an appellant is dissatisfied with an adjudicatory decision, they can then seek judicial review under Chapter 38. So it's the Administrative Procedure Act. And I did that for 2 years, and then the Medicaid director promoted me to become the director of the Office of Medicaid Board of Hearings. So I've been with EOHHS for 6 years, 4 which as a director. So that's where I am now.
And when you went into your role as the director, was it similar to when you went in to lead the drug unit in that you sort of took sort of started from the bottom and said, let's look at everything?
Yes.
Okay. And when you went there, were there things that you saw that needed to change? What were the things that you implemented that you think have been productive?
So I reorganized the office entirely in some ways, but not really. I mean, there are great people there. I mean, I'm really proud of my staff at the Board of Hearings. We call it BOH. They are just hardworking, dedicated, really there to support the members and even providers for that are appealing cases, adverse action for Mass Health. And so what I did was I looked at it and I didn't really see a clear organization. So for example, we have appeals, they come in every day, and recently they've been over 100 every day. So they come in and they need to be screened. And just like any case, you want to make sure that the appeal is perfect. And that is not just on an administrative level, but that's also in a trial level, appeals court, SJC level. You want to make sure that everything you need for the appeal is there. And if it's not, then we handle it a certain way. But once we determine, I should say, an appeal is perfect, it goes into the scheduling unit, right? And then from the scheduling, it then gets assigned to one of the 24 hearing officers, all of which are attorneys in the office. And then it goes through this like whole cycle, and then it gets, we have what I created, the dispositions unit. And that unit then gets a decision. I review every single decision that is issued by the Board of Hearings. They all come to me. I look at them. I sign off on them. And then they go to the dispositions unit. They issue them. They redact the decisions. They then post them on our website, which I'll get into in a little bit. So I looked at how the office functioned, and I realized there was no clearly defined structure of oversight, supervision, define work responsibilities. So I completely restructured it. I created many different units. We have an intake unit, a scheduling unit. We have a team of paralegals that handle cases that are on probate holds because an appellant has passed away and they're waiting for conservatorship from the probate court. We have the dispositions unit. We have a wonderful, amazing administrative staff. One of the things that I created when I came in was that calls should be answered by a live person because healthcare, in my opinion, is just as important as the criminal justice.
All across the board,
Yeah,
live people.
Yeah, so it's, when someone's healthcare is implicated or involved, I mean, it's a very stressful situation in terms of coverage. And we handle every type of appeal, not just eligibility, long-term care. Every nursing facility discharge can be appealed to the Board of Hearings, disability, everything you can think of. And it's really stressful and emotional for a lot of people. And so, when you're facing an adverse action from Mass Health, it's really stressful. Stressful for parents, children of parents. It's just across the board. So one of the things that I did implement was every call should be answered by a live person. It should be personal. It shouldn't just go to, I mean, sometimes it has to go to voicemail because everyone's so busy, but I have
the goal is
administrative
for somebody
staff,
to answer
that's
the
able
phone.
to answer questions, help alleviate as much stress as possible, provide at least some guidance to the procedures. We can't act as lawyers because we are quasi independent and we're definitely impartial. So I've created that. And so I completely restructured it and it grew to a staff of close to 60. And with some attrition, it fluctuates a bit. But I've learned to manage a large scale public, very public facing agency or organization. And we're held accountable. I meet with stakeholders and advocates. I used to meet with them biannually. Now we do it twice a year. And it's there. I'm there to listen to a lot of the attorneys from the Mass Law Reform Institute, GBLS, Greater Boston Legal Services, Disability Law, all these advocates, and hearing what works and what doesn't work, things that need to be corrected or improved, because the whole purpose is to serve the public, right? It's to serve the community. And so I've learned to do that and really learned to collaborate, not just with advocates and stakeholders, but also within Mass Health. Because Mass Health is, like I said, the largest state program, and to work with program and make sure things are working, and just having this line of communication. And I think that I have that unique experience of having that awesome pressure, and I mean that it's a really good pressure to be held accountable, to know how to respond to public inquiry, everything across the board. And the other thing that I started doing was putting every decision that's we redact them obviously to protect HIPAA. We put them all on our website. It's all on there. So anyone who wants to look at what we're doing, you can find decisions that I've written that have been issued on a rehearing basis on our website. And
prior to you coming in, were they public at all?
No. And so the board would be inundated with public records requests, people wanting decisions from a certain period. So now, everything I haven't received a public records request in a long time.
Well, and that's interesting because there's a lot of, sort of the political and legal landscape has intertwined lately, especially in Massachusetts, where there's a lot of questions about transparency in our agencies, one of them being the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. And also this, like you said, public, what are commonly called FOIAs, public records requests, that you have a right as, a citizen of this state and country to obtain certain documents. But often the other side of that people don't see is that when there are, sort of exorbitant amounts of requests, it takes a lot of work on the back end. It's not as quick as just pulling something up and sending it out to the person. It has to be looked at. It has different files. So it's burdensome in some ways on the agency. So I think that's a really smart way to sort of alleviate that because otherwise you'd have some of those
No.
attorneys probably
Right.
spending hours and hours and hours
Right.
looking at documents. Now you have them publicly available to start with, and you limit the amount of inquiries.
So that we can focus on facilitating and processing appeals so that they're heard on a timely basis and decisions are issued on a timely basis. So the resources are there. I mean, now I understand with the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office, there's an exception under FOIA, right? Which is anything that's under investigation. But if they're not, it should be timely responded to. I mean, there are statutory requirements of which a public records request, a FOIA request, should be responded to. And I don't know if that's happening there. And I don't know if they have a public records officer. They should have one, someone who's trained to understand what the requirements are and how to respond to them. So I'm not sure if that exists currently, but if not, that's something I would certainly implement. And again, like structural oversight. I don't know the office because I've never worked there, but I'm curious to know how are cases getting indicted. We used to have
I'm curious as well because, as I've talked about many times, I always say, and it's not to disparage any other DA's office, but I do think that watching the lawyers in Suffolk County, I feel like I sort of saw the best of the best. And it doesn't mean that everybody was perfect or,
no, of course
there were no mistakes.
We can always improve and learn.
Of course.
Yes.
But, even starting at a district court level in Suffolk County as prosecutors, you were assigned cases that were appropriate for your level of experience, but you were largely given sort of the autonomy to assess and make those decisions. You had supervisors to ask questions for. But, I was always taught that, you evaluate the case, and if you have a good faith basis to make a, recommendation, you dismiss something, you plea it for something that another lawyer might not, that the office will really always back you up. And we really didn't have to run much up the ladder unless it was, again, really serious. But I think it's important to give young lawyers the confidence in themselves that, no, I can make this decision and to know if I'm not sure about it, that I have people to speak to. I don't know that that's how Norfolk County.
I don't know, but I know.
I don't think so.
When I was at Suffolk under Dan Connolly, I thought that office was just a model office of how every district attorney's office should run. And obviously Suffolk is the largest prosecutor's office in the Commonwealth. And the supervisors were there, and to guide and to train and to mentor newer young ADAs coming up the ranks. And then for us, I had an amazing first assistant. He's I'm not going to name him, but I think we all know who he is, and he was just really thoughtful and helpful when I wanted to indict certain cases. We always had to write a DI memo, a direct indictment memo, and that memo to me was always really helpful because it made me think through my case and what facts I had to support the indictments I was seeking. And it really, and then he would look at it and then either approve it or say, send it back. And everyone who wanted to indict had to do a memo of that nature. And that really helps you go through the process of, okay, why am I seeking these charges? Are these charges appropriate? Are they supported by the evidence needed to go to trial, not necessarily to just indict?
Right.
Which
is two different standards.
Things. Are there witness issues? If there are witness issues, we should really think about this. It's just that's the kind of process that I would implement in the Norfolk County District Attorney's Office. And like I said, there's, we also have a chief trial counsel back in the day, and who shall remain nameless, who was also wonderful and instructive and had huge amounts of experience from, so the leadership was there under, Dan Connolly's lead, under his administration, much of which I've learned so much and appreciated. And that would be my plan, is to implement really what that office represented to me.
Well, and I think too, this idea of multiple steps, multiple people looking at a case, multiple sets of eyes, and even after that, you think about, the direct indictment would have to go from the line attorney, usually up to their supervisor of the unit, then up to, the first assistants to sign off of, and then it would go to the grand jury where you had an attorney,
the chief
our
of
favorite,
the grand jury, also had she looked at it,
I mean, and again, as I said, I watched sort of that process, and so I know that it's possible to, have a system, again, we're not striving for perfection, but as close as possible to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks, that someone who maybe shouldn't be indicted and maybe should be charged in district court isn't just indicted, one of the most important things I was taught there was, just because you can
Yes.
doesn't mean you should.
Nope.
And prosecutors have immense power.
Yes.
Immense power. And I think it's really important that that power is respected.
Oh, yes.
And we understand that
Yes.
charging people with serious crimes is consequential
Yes.
in many ways. And so I think, so turning to Norfolk County a little bit, and obviously there's been sort of so much attention, not just locally, but really we had nationally with the Karen Reed case, the Sandra Birchmore case. And I think it feels to many people like there wasn't maybe enough oversight. Just personally, in my opinion, looking at the Karen Reed case, there seems to be overcharging. And then when you overcharge something that shouldn't be most likely a second degree murder, should most likely be a manslaughter, then we have all sort of it's like the slippery slope. It turns into something that it shouldn't. And it really starts, in many ways, I think that sort of the chaos that came from it, I think goes back to the decisions early on in the DA's office. And did you follow the case? I mean, it was hard not to follow it, but did you follow it closely?
I didn't follow. I wouldn't say followed it closely, but I followed it enough that it was unavoidable. It was all over the press. It was in every the Herald, the Globe. It was all over social media. So I followed it enough to probably know, definitely not as much as you know, but enough. And based on some of the facts that came out, that I certainly believe that case was overcharged. It was overcharged, and it was then resulted in a mistrial the first time around, and then had to go back to trial. And then the office spent over $500,000 of taxpayers' money to have it retried by an outside attorney, which I think that if you had the skills and the experience already in the office, that probably should stay within the office as opposed to using taxpayers' money to hire outside special counsel, or special prosecutor, I should say.
And I'm interested in your thoughts on that, because different DA's offices do it differently. Oftentimes, if there's a conflict, they send it out to another DA's office. And so I think that's some of the, really the questions that people have, which I think are fair, because when we're spending millions of dollars, and it's not anything against Attorney Brennan. I think he did an excellent job presenting the case. It's not on him, it's really on the office for making those decisions. But, when you have a DA who has to go back to the legislator and ask for more money because they're spending it all on one case, I think it felt to everybody like we have sort of shifted into maybe nobody wants to admit that they've made some wrong decisions. And I think that part of it can be really dangerous, that when the politics gets involved in the decision-making and charging. And so if you're elected as DA and there's a conflict in the office, what would be the procedure that you think would be most efficient? So say that you decide, okay, there's somebody here that, we can't pursue this, but this is somebody that needs to be charged. Do you bring somebody else in? Do you send it out?
I would have to think long and hard about it. I mean, first of all, the most important question is there a conflict, and what is it?
Sure.
I don't know what the conflict was.
I don't think there was a conflict.
For the second trial, right? I mean, the office tried it, right? And my understanding was the person who tried it was his first homicide case. And so based again on my experience of the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office and Suffolk County, that when a prosecutor's trying their first homicide, there's always a second chair, always a second chair, because you need that guidance, and you need someone there who's saying, hey, you need to ask this question.
Yep.
I didn't try my first homicide case in Cleveland without a second chair. Are you kidding me? No way. I had someone who was very experienced, who was sitting next to me. Even my first serious sexual assault case. In Cleveland, it's called aggravated assault. So aggravated sexual assault, which elevates the charges. I had someone sitting with me who had a second chair, guiding me the whole time, tell me what to ask, questions I've forgotten. You have someone to check in with, say, did I miss anything?
Right.
And you need that in the very early, part of your career.
Absolutely.
And so my understanding was there was the first, at that particular ADA was his first homicide trial. Someone should have probably been there. I would have thought that would have been a good thing. I would want that.
Sure.
And then that didn't happen. And then, so then there was the second trial, and then all of a sudden we're hiring a special prosecutor to try it. And I'm wondering, there are other experienced ADAs in the office, and why those people were not tapped in before we tapped into taxpayers' resources.
Yeah.
to
Well,
do
you
that.
know,
and I don't know, and I don't know, like I said, hindsight's always 20/20.
Of course.
I don't know the details or the intricacies of the decision making, but as a Norfolk County District Attorney, that's what I would do. That's what I would do, and I not only would I do that, but I would also surround myself with people who have tried a lot of homicide cases, and know the nuances. So your administration is not just strong because you, as a district attorney, but also the people who are in your administration and support you.
Right. Well, I think too, we heard sort of, there was, of course, there was a lot of gossip everywhere,
Yes,
and it
of
was
course.
really difficult. It was, it was a very, I mean, it was about as high profile
Yeah,
as you could get,
it was.
both for trial one and trial number two. And there was a lot of talk about, no ADAs in the office wanted to take the case. And I think, people assumed that meant that they didn't want to take the case because they didn't think it was provable, things like that. I do think that it's sort of interesting. I'd like to get your thoughts about this intersection now of the public, sort of the public involvement in these criminal cases and what consequences that has had, because I do wonder when it sort of came out that nobody in the office, that's what they said, nobody really wanted to take the case. I wondered if a lot of it was because they didn't want to deal with the level of, quite frankly, harassment that came with anybody who was on the case, everybody who was involved with the case, anybody who talked about the case. There was this sort of automatic, you're a villain. We're going to find you. We're going to find where your wife lives, your husband, your kids go to school. We're going to put them online. And it's a difficult balance because we want the public involved,
Yes,
and
of
we
course.
want people to understand how the process works. But where do we draw the line in, sort of this? We've invited the public in to say, hey, we want you to understand this. And there seems to be, some definite negative consequences to the people who are just trying to do their jobs. I mean, anybody who worked in the Norfolk DA's office during this, I imagine the morale had to have been really low because of all that. And really this idea that we've seen in a lot of these cases, we saw in the Karen Reed case, we saw recently in the Kelsey Fitzsimmons case, that it feels almost as if sometimes these cases, which garner a lot of attention, the public picks a side very quickly. And it's almost hero versus villainish. And then anybody who's on the other side is, free reign for you to do whatever you want. And regardless of what you think ultimately on cases, you have, like in the Karen Reed case, there were a number of civilian witnesses who are under government subpoena to appear, to testify in front of grand juries and at trials, who, from my perspective, were subjected to severe levels of harassment. How do we balance that sort of necessity to have an open and transparent process with, we need to protect witnesses, first of all? I mean, I am a little concerned about, people's likelihood that they want to continue being a witness in a case, that they want to appear, that maybe people don't say, hey, I don't want to talk to the police because I'm going to get all of this. People are going to attack me. My name's going to be spread all over the internet. This is not an easy question, but how do you think we balance that?
Oh, that is not, there's no easy answer to that. I mean, first of all, let me just start with, the public does have a right to know. I mean, we have a right to know what's going on in our court systems. I mean, we have an open courtroom for that purpose,
That's
right?
right.
I mean, it's a public, everything, hearings, town meetings are public, courtroom proceedings are public, unless it's a juvenile or some other circumstances are involved. So the public does have a right to know. We have to stay informed of how our resources being used, how to see whether government is working. So yes, the public has a right to know. But I think also, on the other hand, we now have something called the internet, which we didn't have, right, when I was growing up. So things get viral really quickly, and sometimes there's misinformation. And we have to be careful, or at least be really mindful that, look, we don't want our children to be bullied in school, right? Children are bullied, right? And sometimes to dire consequences, because again, it's online and
Right.
it spreads very quickly with the press of a button. And then you have a lot of keyboard warriors.
Yeah.
So there's a lack of accountability, right? I mean, back in the day, right, if you had feelings against something, you have to say it in person,
That's right.
And there's a level of accountability to that. Now there is no accountability. You can say something really awful and mean and hateful, spiteful and damaging, and just press that return button, and then it's on there, and we don't know who the person is. The person's not going to show their face. So there is really I don't have an answer other than, yes, the public does have a right to know, but it really is a reminder, I think, for all of us to be mindful of. Lawyers went to law school. You're not going to second guess a doctor who went to 4 years of medical school and whatever number of years of residency. You can try to get something on WebMD,
Right.
right? But the bottom line is, if something's not feeling right, you go to the source. You go to the doctor, and respect that person's education and training and experience. And I think the same goes with attorneys. That yes, we have a right to formulate opinions. We have a right to know, and you should have an opinion, but to also make sure that it's not harmful and that you're not interfering with the process. And if government is not working for you, and that's okay, you have a right to believe that, then go vote. And yes, you can express an opinion, but we certainly have gotten to the point where there is a lack of civility. There's a lack of kindness in this world, and it's okay to have a different opinion, because opinions come from our backgrounds, our experiences, our education, our training. A lot of things go into what we formulate as our beliefs. And someone is going to have something different, because we all come from different experiences, life experiences,
That's right.
in a variety of ways. And it's okay, but it's not okay to start having this whole mob mentality about a person without knowing who they are. I mean, I think what's really important about the Karen Reed case is that someone died, someone lost their son, brother, a father, and throughout that whole process, we forgot that. And this is not without casting who did it or what, but
Sure.
we lost a life.
Side of it. Yeah.
We lost sight of that, and the families that have to hear a lot of this mob mentality. There's a family that suffered a great loss. However way it happened, and like I said, I don't know enough about the facts, but we forget that, and we forget that level of kindness that doesn't exist as much anymore. We need to get back to a place of that.
I think you're right, because it's and I think that's it's a good way to put it about being online and having a lack of accountability, because what I've come to learn as someone who's voices sometimes strong opinions online, is that there is a lot of nastiness in the world, and I think I'm like, I don't think people think I'm human. You know what I mean? It's not me, just as an example, but sometimes I'm like, I don't think they would say that to my face, because what you say to someone's face, you see the hurt in their eyes, you see their reaction, you have to respond. And there's this sort of detachment that comes with online that allows us to sort of feed our most negative, and then when you get in this sort of group think and mob mentality, and it sort of fuels that. And so, I think there is no one answer, like you said, but it's important that we have these conversations. And
like I said, a level of accountability on every level. One of the reasons why I insisted on live phone taking at the Board of Hearings for Office Medicaid is, when you talk to someone and you hear the stress, sometimes it's very heightened. You hear that, and it evokes a level of empathy of, okay, like everyone's struggling. Everyone wakes up every day, and everyone has their individual struggles and things going on in their life. So let's not forget that. And again, it's those keyboard warriors. Like you're putting out something hateful. You don't know what's going through. You don't know. And like I said, and the Karen Reed case is very unique in a sense that, it did bring out a lot in people, and I'm not criticizing whether that was right or wrong, but I certainly think that case could have been much better handled on a lot of different levels, that didn't create a lot of those strong feelings from the public. And I'm not saying those strong feelings are not by any way
Right.
validated.
Right.
No, I mean, they are.
Sometimes it's just about how you express those feelings, and I
yeah.
think that, it's maybe it's a lesson for all of us to sort
Yes.
of see, we look, again,
Mm-hmm.
in hindsight, you can
Mm-hmm.
look back and say, okay, this decision, that
Right.
decision from, on a variety of different
Right.
sides,
Right.
from different
Right.
perspectives, and say like, okay, what can we learn from this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And if you're angry about something, it's okay to be angry, but just how are you projecting that?
mm,
And there's someone on the receiving end of that anger,
mm,
and just think about that. And the prosecutors, that I mean, as public servants, we're doing our jobs.
right.
That's what we're here
That's right.
doing every day. Waking up, going out, serving the public in the best way that we can. And with our own internal struggles and struggles going on in life, we everyone's got something going on.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. We,
that's
we
it.
we forget that we're all,
Yeah,
it is, life is
I know,
complicated,
so
and
complicated. Yeah,
and I think you learn that as you get a little bit older and
right.
you live life a little bit more, that hey, everybody has their struggles, everybody has the ups and downs, but I do think that it's I think it's important for, especially in a state like Massachusetts, which it's always been a very political
Yes.
state. There's sort of close knit groups, for people to feel like the leaders they elect are really truly representing
Yeah.
their interests, that they're doing the best for the community, whether it's whatever county, specifically here,
Yeah.
Norfolk County, that people really feel like I voted this person, and I feel like truly they're in this office to help and provide and answer questions if we're seeking them out. And so as we wrap up here, if you're elected, when you're elected, Norfolk County District Attorney, what would be the first thing you do when you go in?
The first thing I would do is I would create a transition team. A lot of new administrations do that, and it would consist of different people from different communities, definitely defense attorneys, because they have firsthand how their experiences with the office. So a lot of Norfolk County defense attorneys would be involved, former prosecutors, just to study the office, and maybe even retired judges, to come in and just understand what's going on with the office, community leaders as well, and figure out what we're keeping, what should be changed, and then I definitely will go through an interview process for all the assistant district attorneys, and that's probably not as like I'm going to interview you, but just to get to know you,
Sure.
and figure out who you are, because
Sure.
I would want to know everyone that works there currently, understand what their strengths are, how they're contributing to the office, what their roles will be in terms of implementing policies that I think are necessary. I know there are a lot of good people who work there.
Yes,
I know
there are.
that, and I know that personally because a lot of my wiretaps would go into Norfolk
Are
County.
there yet?
So I did work really closely with the Braintree Police Department, the Randolph Police Department, Dedham as well. A lot of my cases came into this area.
Yep.
And so as a result, I would have to use the Norfolk County grand jury
Right.
to indict
Right.
my cases. And everyone that I've interacted with have always been very welcoming, instructive, supportive, and just so I know there's really great staff there.
There are. And you know what? I
yeah.
think sometimes, sometimes we all get afraid of change a little bit,
Yeah.
but change is good.
Change is
It doesn't,
good,
like you
yeah.
said, there's,
good.
and I know, enough really good attorneys,
Yeah.
advocates, admins, people who work in the office,
yes.
people who are just doing their job,
Yes,
public
yes,
servants,
yes.
trying to mind their business, put their head down. But sometimes that, when things get a little bit stagnant, obviously DA Morrissey was there for many years, and
16 years.
and sometimes things just need a little bit of
Yes.
switching up.
No, definitely.
It's
We
not
all-
a bad thing.
No, it's always a good thing because I think all of us, we should always constantly evolve, and not just personally, but professionally, but also like in organizations. It's good to bring in fresh perspectives. It is good to redecorate.
That's right.
It really
That's
is,
right.
right?
That's right.
Like it's just a change, especially in working from home now, right?
Yep.
It's good to have that change of environment because you can see clearer, you can focus better. And that's what I would do. That's the first thing I would do. I would study all, what the oversight is, like who's supervising in district court. Are there supervisors? I mean, there's a lot of district courts in Norfolk County.
Yes.
Who's looking at Brookline? Who's looking at
Right.
I would want to know who the supervisors are and who's overseeing all those supervisors. So I am a very in terms of executive thinking, I'm a very organizational, like oversight. Like I want to know, how is this all trickling down? So I always have an org chart in my head, in terms of the flow chart that, okay, who's going what, who's seeing this. And so there's levels of accountability. And that's how I've always been. I'm familiar with that from the Suffolk DA's office, and I do that now in my own organization. So,
and what's needed, because I think I think there might be over 350 or 400 employees in the Norfolk DA. Is it even more?
I think it's less.
Is it less?
I think it's less. I think it's 140.
Lawyers or everyone?
I think everyone.
I thought it was a little bit.
Was it maybe I'm wrong.
I think we could fact check that after and figure it out. I mean, in a budget somewhere in the realm of 12, 13, 14 million dollars. So you know, I mean, I think one of the things that people maybe often don't understand. I always tell people, I'm like, the DA's position is probably the most one of the most important roles that you can vote for, because they're really in charge of making sure that the Commonwealth is safe, sort of law and order, that making sure that crimes are prosecuted, but that also that defendants are respected in their constitutional rights. So it's a really important role criminally, legally, and also administratively, that you have to essentially run a business. And so I think the idea that, you've had experience in multiple sort of facets doing that, not only being able to come in and sort of see the big picture, but implementing it with success is something that's really going to, benefit you as you're out stumping on the campaign trail, So
thank you, Catherine. No, you're right. I mean, like the district attorney is the chief prosecutor. It's, that person is the chief law enforcement officer of that county. And you ensure public safety. You ensure that people feel safe at home. And they're waking up and they go to their driveway, their car's still there. There's like even little things such as that. Your children are safe being able to walk to and from school. I mean, it comes down to just basics. Like as a parent, those are the things that I'm concerned about, is that my children are safe. And even now, as young adults, I still worry about their safety. Whether they're driving home, they're going to get hit by a drunk driver.
That's right.
And my son's 26, and I worry about that constantly. When he's driving. Even though he's out in Worcester, we check in. I'm like, I track him, because you could be doing the best thing in the world, but and then something unfathomable happens, crime.
That's right.
Enters into your life, and so that's what a district attorney does, is to make sure that law enforcement officers are well trained, and that they have a good symbiotic relationship between well trained ADAs that can see when law enforcement is not doing what they're supposed to do, and to say something about it, and understand and respect each other's roles. And because of that, bring up the best in each other, right? And then that, you're going to have public safety. You're going to have transparency. You're going to have accountability and integrity in an office. It's all collaborative experience.
Which is what we need as a voter in Norfolk County. That's what we need. Basically, I want to thank you for coming. I'm really excited. Can you tell everybody where they can find you if they want to, jump on the campaign trail with you, how they can contact you?
Go on my website. It's votemacylee.com. Check it out. There's everything more than I want to know about myself on there. But check it out and sign up to volunteer. I've been canvassing. One of my strong points is going door to door, knocking. Gets my steps in, but I really enjoy meeting people. I've done that in several towns, and that's what I plan on doing until September 1st, is going into every door, knocking, talking to people. Again, face to face, accountability, eye to eye. Ask me any questions. I put myself out there. So yes, I hope I've gained everyone's trust by September 1st, and that I will get the votes that I need.
Well, good luck. Have fun on the trail.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thanks again.
It's great to see you again.
If you like this episode, please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Every bit helps. Thanks for watching Note My Objection. See you next week.